The first snow of the season fell like judgment from heaven. Not the heavy, crushing weight that would come later, but a light dusting that clung to the barren branches and turned the earth white as bone. I stood on my porch at dawn, watching my breath cloud before me, coffee going cold in my hand. The mountains to the west were still shrouded in darkness, but the eastern sky had begun to bleed pink and gold. 23 winters I'd seen on this land. 23 winters since I'd driven stakes into this valley, built this house with my own hands, and called it mine. The Apaches had called it something else before, and the Spanish something else before that. Now it was Barlow's Ranch to anyone who bothered to name it. Just a small holding in the New Mexico territory, but it was mine. I was about to turn back inside when I saw it. A dark shape against the pristine snow, maybe a quarter-mile down near the creek bed. Probably a deer or elk that hadn't made it through the night. Wolves would find it soon enough. I set my cup down on the porch rail and squinted against the growing light. The shape moved. My Winchester was in my hands before I'd given it a thought, old instincts refusing to die. I watched a moment longer to be sure, then headed for the barn. My horse, a sturdy buckskin gelding named Samson, nickered softly as I saddled him, his breath steaming in the cold air of the barn. "Easy, boy," I murmured. "Just need to check something." The ride was short, hooves crunching through fresh snow. As I drew closer, I slowed Samson to a walk. Whatever it was had stopped moving. I approached cautiously, rifle ready across my lap. It wasn't until I was nearly upon it that I saw the truth of what lay there. Not an animal, but a person. Small, wrapped in a tattered blanket crusted with snow and darker stains that could only be blood. I dismounted, keeping my distance, grip tightening on my rifle. "Hello?" I called, voice rough from disuse. Nobody to talk to out here but Samson and myself most days. No response came. I edged closer, using the barrel of my Winchester to gently prod at the blanket. It shifted, and a soft moan escaped from within. I pulled back the edge of the fabric. A girl stared back at me. Young. Christ, maybe 16 or 17. Her face was gaunt, lips blue with cold, dark eyes wide with fear or fever, I couldn't tell which. Her black hair was matted with blood. Not white. Comanche, by the looks of her, though I'd seen few enough up close to be certain. "You hurt?" I asked, though the answer was plain enough. She said nothing, only stared at me with those dark, unfathomable eyes. Her body trembled violently. "All right then," I muttered. I should leave her. That's what any sensible man would do. Comanches had been raiding farms and settlements all through the territory. There'd been talk in town of the army bringing them to heel, once and for all. Finding one of them bleeding on my land was trouble I didn't need. But she was just a girl. And she was dying, sure as the sun rises. I sighed, a long, weary sound that seemed to hang in the frigid air. I'm probably going to regret this. I holstered my rifle and knelt beside her. When I reached out, she flinched but was too weak to fight as I unwrapped the blanket enough to see her wounds. A deep gash ran along her side, and her leg was bent at an unnatural angle. She'd been shot, too. A bullet wound in her shoulder, crusted over with dried blood. "Someone worked you over good," I said quietly. I glanced around, scanning the horizon. Whoever had done this could still be out there. "Can you understand me? English?" Her eyes flickered, but she remained silent. "Right." I rewrapped the blanket around her and slid my arms beneath her frail body. She weighed almost nothing. "This is going to hurt." Her only response was a sharp intake of breath as I lifted her. I carried her to Samson, who shied nervously at the strange scent of blood and fear. "Steady," I commanded, and managed to hoist myself into the saddle while cradling the girl. I could feel the heat of fever radiating through the blanket now. "Let's go home, boy." I looked down at the dark head nestled against my chest and felt a cold knot of dread form in my stomach. The last time I'd been this close to a Comanche, I'd been looking down the barrel of my gun. I laid her on my bed and built up the fire until the room was almost stifling. After heating water on the stove, I gathered what few medical supplies I had: a bottle of whiskey, some clean rags, a needle and thread I used for mending clothes. It would have to do. She remained conscious through most of it, her eyes following my every move. When I cut away her bloodied dress to clean the wounds, she made no sound of protest, though her body went rigid. The bullet had gone clean through her shoulder, a small mercy. The gash on her side needed stitching. Her leg was broken below the knee, a compound fracture with the bone jutting through skin. "This is going to hurt like hell," I warned her, holding up the whiskey bottle, "but it needs doing." I poured the alcohol over her wounds. Her back arched off the bed, a strangled cry tearing from her throat, the first sound she'd made beyond breathing. I held her down with one hand, surprised at the strength still left in her broken body. Setting the leg was worse. I gave her a leather belt to bite down on, but she refused it, staring at me with defiance burning through the fever in her eyes. When I pulled the bone back into place, she passed out. It was a blessing. I splinted the leg with pieces of kindling, bandaged her shoulder and side with strips torn from an old shirt. It was crude work, but the best I could manage. If infection set in, she'd die anyway. Night had fallen by the time I finished. I stoked the fire again, then pulled a chair up beside the bed and watched her breathe. Her face in repose was young, painfully so. She couldn't be more than 16. What had she been doing out here alone? Where was her people? Questions with no answers. I leaned back in the chair and closed my eyes, suddenly exhausted. The smart thing would be to ride into town at first light, tell Marshal Dawson about the girl. Let him decide what to do. But I knew what would happen if I did. Best case, they'd ship her off to some reservation. Worst case, well, there had been a rash of killings on both sides lately. Tempers were high. What the hell am I doing? I muttered to the empty room. The girl stirred in her sleep, her face contorting with pain. I leaned forward and laid a hand on her forehead, still burning with fever. "You just focus on staying alive," I told her. "We'll figure out the rest later." 3 days passed before her fever broke. 3 days of changing bandages, spooning broth between cracked lips, watching for signs of the infection that would kill her. I slept in the chair beside the bed, waking at her slightest movement. On the morning of the 4th day, I awoke to find her watching me. The fevered glaze had left her eyes, replaced by a clear, penetrating gaze that seemed to cut right through me. "You're looking better," I said, straightening in the chair. My back protested the movement after too many nights spent upright. She said nothing, only continued to stare. I stood and stretched. "I'll get you something to eat, real food this time, not just broth." As I turned to leave, her voice stopped me. It was soft, raspy from disuse, but clear enough. "Why?" I looked back at her. "Why what?" "Why help?" Her English was halting but understandable. I considered the question, surprised to find I didn't have a ready answer. "You were dying," I said finally. Seemed the decent thing to do. She frowned slightly as if my answer puzzled her. "You got a name?" I asked. She hesitated, then said, "Numunu." "That's your name?" "My people." "Right." I'd heard the word before. It was what the Comanche called themselves. The people. I meant you. What do they call you? Again that hesitation, the weighing of trust. Finally she said, "Tabe." "Tabe," I repeated, stumbling over the unfamiliar sounds. "I'm John Barlow. This is my ranch." She nodded once, then closed her eyes, conversation apparently over. I fixed a simple breakfast of bacon and cornbread, then helped her sit up to eat. She managed a few bites before exhaustion overtook her, and she slipped back into sleep. But it was a natural sleep this time, not the restless unconsciousness of fever. Standing at the window while she slept, I looked out over my land, wondering what I'd gotten myself into. I needed supplies from town, more bandages, medicine if I could get it, but word would spread fast if I started asking for things to treat wounds. Questions would be asked. And how would I explain the girl if anyone came calling? More pressing was the question of where she'd come from and who had shot her. Comanches didn't typically travel alone, especially not young girls. She must have been separated from her band somehow, and whoever had hurt her might still be looking to finish the job. I glanced back at her sleeping form. The right thing to do was clear enough. As soon as she was strong enough to travel, I needed to find her people and return her to them. But that carried its own dangers. Comanche war parties weren't known for asking questions before attacking lone white men. One problem at a time, I told myself. First, keep her alive. Then worry about the rest. A week passed. Taabe's strength returned slowly. The wound in her side healed clean, but her leg would take time. She remained mostly silent, watching me with those dark, inscrutable eyes as I went about my daily chores. I'd bring her books sometimes, not that she could read them, but she seemed to like looking at the illustrations in my old copy of Gulliver's Travels. I slept on a pallet by the fire now, giving her the bed. Each morning, I'd help her sit by the window while I changed the bedding, and she'd stare out at the mountains as if searching for something on the horizon. On the 8th day, I decided I couldn't put off going to town any longer. We needed supplies, and I needed information. If there was talk of missing Comanche, I needed to hear it. "I have to go into town," I told her as I pulled on my coat. "I'll be back before dark." She looked up from the book in her lap. "Town," she repeated. Something like fear flickered across her face. "Don't worry, you'll be safe here. Keep the door locked and there's the pistol." I'd shown her how to use my old Colt revolver the day before, placing it on the table beside the bed. She'd handled it with surprising familiarity. She nodded, her expression guarded. "White men in town, they hate Numunu." "Some do," I admitted. "That's why you're staying here." She seemed to consider this, then asked, "You hate?" The question caught me off guard. "I don't know you well enough to hate you," I said finally. Something that might have been amusement touched her lips. "But Numunu, you hate?" I sighed, suddenly uncomfortable under her steady gaze. "It's not that simple." "Simple," she echoed. "Man kills, man hates, simple." I stared at her, wondering how much English she really understood and how much she'd guessed about me. "I'll be back before dark," I repeated, and left before she could ask anything else. Bitter Creek wasn't much of a town. A single dusty street lined with false-fronted buildings, a church at one end and a saloon at the other, marking the boundaries of civilization. In between were Whitaker's General Store, the marshal's office, Sullivan's Hotel, and a handful of other establishments that served the scattered ranches and farms of the territory. I hitched Samson outside the general store and stepped inside, nodding to Mrs. Whitaker behind the counter. The shop smelled of coffee beans, leather, and the sharp tang of pickles and brine. "John Barlow," she said with a smile. "Thought you might have frozen to death out there. Haven't seen you in weeks." "Been busy," I replied, picking up a basket and beginning to fill it with supplies. Coffee, sugar, flour, salt. "Busy," she chuckled. "Out there all alone?" "What keeps a man so busy he can't come to town for a proper meal now and then?" I forced a smile. "Ranch doesn't run itself, Mrs. Whitaker." "Well, you picked a fine time to come in. There's been all sorts of excitement." I paused in my shopping. "What kind of excitement?" "Army patrol came through yesterday. Lieutenant Hollister and his men." She leaned forward conspiratorially. "They're hunting Comanches. Seems there was a raid on the Peterson place up north. Burned it to the ground." My stomach tightened. "Anyone hurt?" "Old man Peterson and his son both killed. Mrs. Peterson and the little ones made it to the Newman farm." She shook her head sadly. "Savages, that's what they are. Lieutenant says they're going to round them all up this time. Put them where they can't hurt decent folk." I nodded non-committally and added bandages and laudanum to my basket. "That so?" "Army's offering $50 for information leading to their camp. They think it's somewhere in the hills west of here." She eyed my purchases. "You hurt yourself, John." "Just restocking," I said. "Never know when you might need it." She rang up my purchases, still chattering about the Army patrol and the Peterson raid. I paid without really listening, my mind racing. If there were soldiers in the area hunting Comanche, Taabe's presence on my ranch was even more dangerous than I'd thought. As I was loading my supplies onto Samson, a voice called out from across the street. "Barlow, hold up there." I turned to see Marshal Dawson striding toward me, thumbs hooked in his belt. A big man with a drooping mustache and hard eyes, Dawson had been marshal in Bitter Creek for as long as I'd lived in the territory. "Marshal," I greeted him. "Haven't seen you around lately." His eyes flicked to my loaded saddlebags. "Stocking up, I see." "Winter's coming. Don't like to get caught short." He nodded, then lowered his voice. "You seen any sign of Indians out your way? Army's got a patrol looking for a war party. Raided the Peterson place 2 days ago." "So I heard," I said. "Haven't seen anything unusual." Dawson studied my face. "You sure about that?" "Lieutenant's offering a reward for information." "I'm sure. If I see anything, you'll be the first to know." He seemed satisfied with that. "See that you do. These aren't just any Comanche. Lieutenant says they're renegades from up north. Chief goes by the name of Black Horse. Mean son of a bitch by all accounts." The name struck me like a physical blow. Black Horse. I knew that name. Every settler in the territory did. "I'll keep my eyes open," I managed to say. "You do that." Dawson clapped me on the shoulder. "And maybe don't wait so long between visits to town. People get to wondering about a man who keeps too much to himself." I mounted Samson and tipped my hat. "I'll bear that in mind, Marshal." As I rode out of town, my thoughts churned like the darkening sky above. Black Horse. One of the most feared Comanche war chiefs in the territory. And if the Army was hunting him and his band, that meant they were close. What were the odds that a wounded Comanche girl would show up on my land just as the Army was hunting Black Horse's band? I thought of Taabe's guarded eyes, her reluctance to speak of her people. There was more to her story than she was telling me. By the time I reached the ranch, snow had begun to fall again, fat flakes swirling in the wind. I stabled Samson and hurried to the house, stamping snow from my boots on the porch. Taabe was where I'd left her, by the window, but she'd moved the chair to face the door, and the Colt revolver lay in her lap. "You're back," she said simply. I hung my coat by the door and began unpacking the supplies. "Told you I would be." "Soldiers in town?" I froze, then slowly turned to face her. "How did you know that?" She didn't answer directly. "They look for Numunu." "Yes," I admitted. "They're looking for a war party. Chief named Black Horse." At the name, her face changed, something flickering behind her eyes before she could hide it, confirmation of what I'd already begun to suspect. "You know him," I said. It wasn't a question. For a long moment, she said nothing, then, barely above a whisper, "My father." The confession hung in the air between us like gun smoke. Black Horse's daughter. I'd been harboring the child of the most feared war chief in the territory. If the Army found out, they'd hang me for treason. If the settlers found out, they wouldn't bother with the formality of a rope. "Your father," I repeated, trying to keep my voice steady. "Black Horse is your father." She lifted her chin slightly. "Yes." "And you didn't think to mention this?" "Would you help if no?" The question stopped me cold. Would I have helped her if I'd known who she was? I'd like to think basic human decency would have prevailed, but the truth was, I didn't know. I ran a hand through my hair, trying to think. "Why were you alone?" Where is your father's band?" She looked away. Soldiers attack camp. Night. Much killing. Her hands tightened on the book in her lap. I run. Horsefall. Soldiers shoot. "And you crawled all the way to my creek?" It seemed impossible. "2 nights," she said. "Hide day, move night." 2 nights dragging herself through the wilderness with a bullet wound and broken leg. The girl had a will of iron. "Your father? He thinks you're dead." She nodded once, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "All dead. My mother. My brothers." I sat heavily in the chair opposite her. "I'm sorry," I said, and meant it. Whatever Black Horse had done, his family hadn't deserved that. "Why sorry?" she asked, her voice suddenly hard. "White soldiers kill. You white." "I had nothing to do with that," I protested. "All white same," she said. "Kill Numunu. Take land." I felt a flare of anger. "Is that why your father raided the Peterson farm? Killed Peterson and his son? Because all whites are the same." Her eyes widened slightly. "Peterson farm?" "2 days ago, your father's war party burned it to the ground. Killed the men." She shook her head slowly. "Number. Not my father. The army seems to think it was—" "Army lies," she said fiercely. "My father." She struggled for words. "After camp attack, few live. My father take them to mountains. Hide, not raid." I wanted to believe her, but I'd heard too many stories about Black Horse over the years. "Tabe, your father's reputation—" "You know my father?" she interrupted. "You see him kill?" "No, but—" "Then you not know." She looked away again, out the window where snow continued to fall. "My father, great warrior, fight to protect our land, our people." She turned back to me, eyes burning with intensity. "But he not kill women, children. This not our way." I remembered what Marshal Dawson had said. Black Horse's band were renegades from up north. They must have fled south after the army attacked their camp. "If what you're saying is true," I said slowly, "then whoever raided the Peterson place is trying to make it look like your father's work." "Yes," she said, "to hunt him, kill all who remain." The implications settled over me like a cold weight. If she was telling the truth, the army was hunting the wrong Comanche. And Black Horse's surviving band, perhaps the last of his people, were hiding in the mountains, wounded and desperate, believing Tabe was dead. "Your leg," I said. "How is it feeling?" She seemed puzzled by the change of subject. "Better. Still pain." "Can you ride? With help?" Understanding dawned in her eyes. "You take me to my father?" "If I can find him," I said, not quite believing what I was suggesting. "You said they're in the mountains. Do you know where?" She nodded. "Sacred cave, where ancestors live. I can show." It was madness. If we were caught by the army, I'd be shot as a traitor. If Black Horse's warriors saw a white man approaching their hiding place, they'd kill me before I could explain. But the alternative was to keep Tabe here until she healed completely, all the while knowing her father believed her dead. Or worse, turn her over to the army, who would use her as bait to draw out Black Horse. "We'll leave tomorrow," I decided, "before dawn." For the first time since I'd found her, Tabe smiled. It transformed her face, reminding me again how young she was. "Thank you," she said. I nodded, already wondering if I'd live to regret this decision. "Get some rest. We have a long ride ahead." That night I dreamed of Canyon Blanco. It was always the same dream. The cold morning air, the smell of gunpowder and blood, the screams. I'd been 23, newly arrived in the territory with dreams of making my fortune. When the call came for volunteers to join the militia against the Comanche raids, I'd signed up without hesitation. Adventure, I'd thought. A chance to prove myself. The militia had tracked a Comanche band to Canyon Blanco. We'd attacked at dawn, riding into their camp with guns blazing. I remember the confusion, the shouting, the panic. Women running with children in their arms. Men trying to mount a defense. It was over quickly, too quickly, and then the counting began. 17 Comanche warriors dead, 23 women, 14 children. One of the children couldn't have been more than 5. I found him hiding under a buffalo robe, trembling with fear. When he saw me, he'd reached for a small knife. I fired without thinking. His eyes as the light went out of them. That's what stayed with me. That's what I saw in my dreams. I woke with a gasp, sweat cold on my skin despite the fire still burning low in the hearth. Across the room, Tabe watched me from the bed, her eyes reflecting the dim firelight. "Bad dreams," she said softly. I sat up, rubbing my face. "Did I wake you? I'm sorry." "You talk, in sleep." She hesitated. "You cry." I felt heat rise to my face. What did I say? Names. Places. She paused. Canyon Blanco. The name hung between us like an accusation. I couldn't meet her eyes. "You were there," she said, "when soldiers kill my people." It wasn't a question, but I answered anyway. "Yes." "You kill." I could have lied, said I was just a scout, that I never fired a shot, but something in her steady gaze demanded truth. "Yes," I admitted. "I killed." She was silent for a long moment. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, "Children." The boy's eyes flashed in my memory. "One," I said, my voice hoarse. "A boy. He had a knife." "Ah." She nodded as if this confirmed something she'd already known. "And now, you dream." "Now I dream," I agreed. She was quiet again, considering. Finally she said, "My people believe dreams are spirits talking. The dead speak to living this way." "What are they saying to me?" I asked, not sure I wanted to know the answer. "That you not forget," she said simply. "That is good. Man who forgets killing is monster." Her words hit me like a physical blow. In all the years since Canyon Blanco, all the nights spent drinking to forget, all the days spent building this ranch as if I could somehow atone, no one had ever offered me that perspective. That remembering, painful as it was, meant I was still human. "Try sleep again," Tabe said, turning away. "Tomorrow, long journey." I lay back down, staring at the ceiling. "Tabe," I said after a moment. "Thank you." She didn't respond, but in the dim light I thought I saw her nod. We left before first light, the eastern sky just beginning to pearl with dawn. I'd fashioned a travois for Tabe, a triangle of poles with a buffalo robe stretched between them, attached to Samson's saddle. It wasn't ideal, but her leg couldn't take the strain of riding astride. The air was bitter cold, our breath clouding before us as we set out. I'd dressed Tabe in my spare clothes, too big for her, but warmer than her tattered dress. With a hat pulled low and a scarf wrapped around the lower half of her face, she might pass for a boy at a distance. It was a thin disguise, but better than nothing. "Which way?" I asked as we reached the edge of my property. She pointed west, toward the mountains. "There, where sun sets." I nodded and turned Samson in that direction, leading him carefully over the uneven ground. The travois bumped and swayed behind, and though Tabe made no sound of complaint, I knew each jolt must be agony on her broken leg. We traveled in silence through the morning. The snow had stopped during the night, but the sky remained heavy with clouds promising more. By midday, we'd reached the foothills, and I called a halt by a small stream to water Samson and rest. I helped Tabe sit against a boulder and gave her some jerky and hardtack from my provisions. She ate mechanically, her eyes constantly scanning the horizon. "How much farther?" I asked. "Before dark," she said. "If no soldiers—" I nodded, checking my Winchester for the 100th time. If we do run into soldiers, let me do the talking. Keep your face covered. She gave me a look that suggested she wasn't foolish enough to do otherwise. We continued on, the terrain growing steeper, the trees more dense. Taabe directed me along game trails I would have missed on my own. Despite her injury, she seemed to know every ridge and valley, every stream and copse of trees. As the afternoon waned, snow began to fall again, light flurries that reduced visibility and muffled sound. I was growing increasingly uneasy. These mountains were unfamiliar territory to me, and if we had to spend the night, the cold could kill us both. There, Taabe said suddenly, pointing to a rocky outcropping ahead. Behind those stones, a path. I squinted through the falling snow but could see nothing resembling a path. Still, I guided Samson toward the rocks. As we drew closer, I saw what she meant, a narrow gap between two boulders, barely wide enough for a horse to pass through. "You sure about this?" I asked, eyeing the tight passage. "Yes." She sat up straighter on the travois, alert now. My people there, beyond the rocks. I hesitated, then dismounted and drew my rifle. "I'll go first, on foot. If your people are there, they might shoot before they realize who you are." She caught my arm, surprising me with her strength. "Give me this," she said, gesturing to the rifle. "Why?" "So you not shot," she said, as if explaining to a child. "I go first. Call to my people." It made sense, but handing over my only weapon to the daughter of a Comanche war chief went against every instinct I had. Still, if her people were on the other side of that pass, I was dead anyway if they saw me as a threat. "All right," I said, and passed her the Winchester. I untied the travois and helped her stand, supporting most of her weight as she hobbled toward the gap in the rocks. Snow fell more heavily now, the wind picking up, driving icy particles against our faces. "Wait," I said as we reached the passage. "What if your father isn't there? What if it's another band?" She looked up at me, her dark eyes solemn. "Then we both die." With that comforting thought, we squeezed through the narrow gap, Taabe leaning heavily on me, the rifle clutched in her free hand. The passage twisted between the rocks, forcing us to turn sideways at points. It was dark within, protected from the snow but bitingly cold where the wind funneled through the stone. Then we were through, emerging onto a small plateau sheltered by overhanging rock. Beyond it, the mountain rose steeply, and in its face I could see the dark mouth of a cave. Taabe raised the rifle and fired a single shot into the air. The report echoed off the stone walls around us, startlingly loud after hours of muffled silence. Then she called out in Comanche, her voice strong and clear despite her weakness. Words I couldn't understand, but the emotion in them was unmistakable. A daughter calling for her father. Silence followed. Long seconds stretched into a minute. I began to think the cave was empty, that we'd come all this way for nothing. Then movement caught my eye. A figure emerged from the cave mouth, then another. Men with rifles moving cautiously down the rocky slope toward us. Taabe called out again, more urgently. One of the men stopped abruptly. Even at this distance I could see his posture change, tension giving way to disbelief. He shouted something back, and then he was running toward us, heedless of the treacherous footing. More figures poured from the cave behind him, but I kept my eyes on the first man. Tall and powerfully built, with long black hair streaked with gray, his face was deeply lined, his eyes fierce beneath heavy brows. Black Horse. I knew him instantly, though we'd never met. His reputation hadn't exaggerated his presence. Taabe pulled away from me, trying to move toward her father, but her strength failed her. She would have fallen if I hadn't caught her. Black Horse saw this and raised his rifle, shouting something that needed no translation. "No!" Taabe cried out in English. "No kill! He helped me!" Black Horse paused, his rifle still trained on my chest. By now, we were surrounded by warriors. I counted at least 15, all armed, all regarding me with open hostility. Tabe spoke rapidly in Comanche, gesturing toward me and then to her splinted leg. Black Horse listened, his expression unreadable. When she finished, he approached slowly, stopping just out of arm's reach. "You bring my daughter," he said in heavily accented English. "Why?" I swallowed hard, acutely aware of the rifles pointed at me from all sides. "She told me you thought she was dead. That wasn't right." "Not right," he repeated as if testing the words. "White man care what right for Comanche?" "I care what's right for her," I said, nodding toward Tabe. "She's been through enough." Black Horse studied me, his dark eyes boring into mine as if searching for deception. Finally, he made a sharp gesture, and 2 warriors came forward to take Tahabe from me. They lifted her gently, carrying her toward the cave. "She need rest," Black Horse said. "You come." It wasn't an invitation, but a command. I followed him up the slope, the warriors falling in behind me. I could feel their eyes on my back, their weapons ready if I made a wrong move. The snow was falling more heavily now, swirling in the wind that cut across the plateau. The cave was larger than it had appeared from below, extending deep into the mountain. Fires burned at intervals, providing light and warmth. I counted perhaps 50 people in all, men, women, and children, many wounded or ill. The remnants of Black Horse's band, survivors of the army's attack. They watched me pass with expressions ranging from fear to hatred. A white man in their sanctuary. It was unthinkable. Yet no one challenged Black Horse as he led me to a fire near the back of the cave where Tabe had been laid on a bed of furs. "Sit," Black Horse commanded, indicating a spot across the fire. I sat, setting my hat beside me. Black Horse remained standing, towering over me, his face thrown into sharp relief by the firelight. "My daughters say you find her, care for her wounds. This true?" "Yes," I said. "Why?" The same question Tabe had asked me that first day. I gave him the same answer. She was dying. Seemed the decent thing to do. Black Horse grunted, something flickering across his weathered face. "Decent," he repeated as if testing an unfamiliar word. "My daughters say you fought at Canyon Blanco." The accusation hung in the air between us. I could feel the attention of the warriors around us sharpen, their hands tightening on weapons. "Yes," I admitted. "I was there." Black Horse's eyes hardened. "You kill my people." I did. There was no point denying it. For a long moment he said nothing, just studied me with those impenetrable eyes. Then, to my surprise, he lowered himself to sit opposite me across the fire. "Yet, you saved my daughter." He shook his head slowly. "I not understand white man." "I don't understand myself sometimes," I said truthfully. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "This we have in common." By morning, the storm had passed. I stood at the mouth of the cave, watching the sun rise over a world transformed to crystal white. Black Horse stood beside me, his arms crossed over his chest. "Army hunting you," I said. "They blame you for the raid on Peterson's farm." He nodded. Not first time white men blame Comanche for what they not do. "You think someone else raided the farm? Made it look like your work?" "Know this," he said. "Broken arrow band. They break from old ways. Kill for pleasure, not honor. Even other Comanche fear them." I remembered what Tabe had told me. "Your camp was attacked. By the army." "Yes, 3 weeks passed. We make peace with white soldiers before. They promise food, blankets." His voice hardened. "They bring bullets instead." It was a story I'd heard too many times. Treaties made and broken. Promises betrayed. "I will take Tabe back with me," I said. "To my ranch. She'll be safer there until her leg heals." Black Horse looked at me sharply. "Why you do this?" I thought about it. "Because I owe a debt. For Canyon Blanco. For other things." He seemed to weigh my words, then nodded once. Debt not paid so easy, but I accept. He turned to face me fully. When snow melts, I come for her. It was as close to trust as I was likely to get. The return journey was harder than the trip out. Snow lay deep on the ground, and Tabe's condition had worsened with the travel. By the time we reached my ranch, twilight was falling, and she burned with fever again. I carried her inside and laid her on the bed, stoking the fire and preparing a fresh poultice for her wounds. As I worked, she drifted in and out of consciousness, murmuring in Comanche. "You're home," I told her, though I wasn't sure she could hear me. "You're safe now." But even as I said the words, I knew they might be a lie. The army was still hunting Black Horse. If they found out I was harboring his daughter, we'd both be in danger. For 2 days, I rarely left her side, spooning broth between her lips, changing the dressings on her wounds, watching her fight the fever. On the 3rd day, she opened her eyes, clear and lucid once more. "My father," she said. "He let me come back." "He did," I confirmed. "Said he'll come for you when the snow melts." She nodded, then studied my face. "Why you help Comanche? Truth now." I considered my answer carefully. "Because 20 years ago, I helped kill them, and I've been trying to live with that ever since." "Guilt," she said. "Partly," I admitted. "But it's more than that now." She seemed to accept this, her eyes drifting closed again. A week passed in relative peace. Tabe's strength returned slowly. We fell into a routine, me tending the ranch, her watching from the window or sitting by the fire, the silence between us gradually growing more comfortable. Then, at dawn on the 8th day, I saw them, riders on the distant ridge. Too many to count at this distance, but their silhouettes unmistakable against the pale sky. Comanche warriors, at least 50 of them. My heart pounded as I grabbed my rifle and went to wake Tiabe. She was already awake, standing by the window despite her injured leg. "They come," she said simply. "Your father's band?" She shook her head, her expression grim. "Broken Arrow. They find us." A cold knot formed in my stomach. "How do you know?" "My father's warriors wear fox fur in winter. These wear wolf." She turned to me, her eyes intense. "They kill you. Take me." I checked my rifle and revolver, though I knew they'd be little use against so many. "What do they want with you?" "Black Horse daughter valuable. Trade to army for guns, horses." Her voice was matter of fact. "Or keep. Make slave." I looked out at the approaching riders now spreading out to surround the ranch. There was no chance of outrunning them, not with Tabe's injured leg, and no chance of fighting them off alone. "We need to get you out of here," I said, already moving to gather supplies. "There's a root cellar under the barn. If I can get you there—" "No," she interrupted, her voice firm. "I not hide while you die." "You can't fight," I pointed out. "Can shoot," she countered. "You teach me your gun, remember?" I remembered. She'd handled the Colt with unexpected skill. Still, 2 guns against 50 warriors. The sound of hoofbeats grew louder. Time was running out. "There's another option," I said slowly, an idea forming. "But you'll have to trust me." She studied my face, then nodded once. "I trust." When the leader of the Broken Arrow band approached my porch, I was waiting for him. I stood with my hands empty at my sides, my rifle leaning against the wall behind me. Close enough to grab if needed, but not threatening. The warrior was younger than I'd expected, perhaps 30, with a face marked by smallpox scars. He wore a U.S. cavalry coat over traditional Comanche leggings, an incongruous sight that somehow made him more intimidating. "I know why you're here," I called out in English. "You're looking for Black Horse's daughter." The warrior's eyes narrowed. He said something to the men flanking him, then addressed me in halting English. "Where, girl?" Safe, I said, and she'll stay that way. The warrior sneered. One white man. Many Comanche. You die now. Probably, I agreed. But before I do, you should know something. The Army patrol hunting Black Horse is camped less than 5 miles south of here. If you attack this ranch, they'll hear the gunfire. It was a bluff. The last I'd heard, the patrol was searching the northern hills. But the warrior's hesitation told me the lie had struck home. Army, already no girl here, he said, but with less certainty. That's right, I said. Lieutenant Hollister himself was here yesterday. Saw the girl, but he doesn't want her. He wants Black Horse. Another lie, but I could see the doubt spreading among the warriors. The girl stays with me until Black Horse comes for her, I continued. That was the arrangement with the Army. They're using her as bait. The warrior conferred with his men, their voices low and urgent. I held my breath, hoping the bluff would hold. Finally, he turned back to me. We go now, but we watch. If you lie. He drew a finger across his throat. I nodded, keeping my face impassive despite the relief flooding through me. I understand. They withdrew slowly, reluctantly, casting suspicious glances back at the ranch. I stood on the porch until they disappeared over the ridge, then sagged against the doorframe, my legs suddenly weak. They gone! Tabe's voice came from inside. For now, I said, stepping back into the house, but they'll be watching. And when they realize I lied about the Army. She nodded, understanding the unspoken conclusion. We must reach my father. Tell him Broken Arrow come. Can you ride? I asked. Really ride, not on a travois? She considered this, then nodded grimly. If must, I ride. Then we leave at nightfall, I decided, make for the mountains under cover of darkness. The journey through the snowy darkness was slow and treacherous. Tabe rode behind me on Samson, her arms wrapped around my waist, her face pressed against my back against the bitter cold. Each hoofbeat seemed too loud in the stillness, and I constantly scanned the ridgelines for signs of pursuit. By dawn, we'd reached the foothills. I found a sheltered ravine where we could rest and warm ourselves over a small, smokeless fire. You think they follow? Tabe asked, huddled in my coat. Yes, I said, but the snow will slow them down, and they don't know these hills like you do. She nodded, her expression distant. When we reach my father, you stay? The question caught me off guard. With your people, you mean? Yes. She met my eyes steadily. My father respect you now. You would be safe. I considered it, leaving behind the solitary existence I'd built, the ranch that had been both sanctuary and prison, living among the people I'd once fought against, seeking some kind of redemption. I don't know, I said honestly. I don't know if I belong anywhere anymore. She seemed to accept this, turning her gaze to the mountains rising before us. We all belong, somewhere, John Barlow. Even you. We reached the sacred cave as dusk was falling. The sentries recognized us immediately, and within moments, Black Horse himself appeared, his face registering shock at our return. Broken Arrow, come, Tabe told him without preamble. 50 warriors, they search for you. Black Horse's expression hardened. He barked orders and the camp erupted into activity. Weapons being gathered, horses saddled, children and elders moved deeper into the cave. You bring this warning at great risk, Black Horse said to me. Why? Because your daughter asked me to, I said simply, and because it was the right thing to do. He studied me for a long moment, then placed a hand on my shoulder. You have heart of Numunu, John Barlow, not heart of white man. I'm not sure what I have anymore, I admitted. He nodded as if he understood perfectly. When fight comes, you stand with us? I thought of the ranch I'd left behind, probably already burned to the ground by the Broken Arrow band, of the life I'd built there, solitary and haunted by ghosts, of Canyon Blanco and the debts that could never truly be repaid. And I thought of Taabe, watching me now from beside her father, her dark eyes reflecting the firelight. "Yes," I said, "I'll stand with you." Black Horse smiled, a fierce expression that transformed his weathered face. "Then you belong somewhere after all." As night fell over the mountains, I took my place among the Comanche warriors, rifle in hand, watching the darkness for signs of our enemies. The snow had begun to fall again, soft and silent, covering our tracks and blurring the boundaries between worlds. Taabe came to stand beside me, leaning on a crudely fashioned crutch. "You afraid?" she asked. "Yes," I admitted, "but not of dying." She nodded, understanding. "Of living." "That's always been the harder part," I said. She smiled then, a genuine smile that reached her eyes. "Not alone," she said. "Never alone again." And as we stood together watching the snow fall, I realized she was right. Whatever came with the dawn, battle, death, or some unexpected reprieve, I was no longer the solitary figure who had stood on his porch that winter morning, watching his breath cloud before him. That man was gone, transformed by an act of mercy he hadn't known he was capable of. In saving Taabe, I had somehow, improbably, saved myself. I shouldered my rifle and prepared to face whatever morning would bring,